Hello and welcome to another Smaulgld live stream. It is Thursday, the 26th of September 2019, and this afternoon's topic. The Reserve Bank of India tweets, "No need to panic." It's interesting when a central bank has to make a statement not to panic. They didn't quite say what they're not to panic about, but there are news reports out that there may be something amiss in the Indian banking system, which would not be a surprise given that there's something amiss in the general financial system. We've been talking about the repos going on and the lack of liquidity. Would not be a surprise that they might be having issues in the Indian banking system. And of course, Indian government, Indian banks are clearly not immune to any type of intervention. We saw India a while back pretty much demonetize their entire cash system in order to get people into the banking system. They had to turn in their old rupees to get new rupees, or if they didn't have enough rupees, then they would give you a bank account or digital rupees, and off you went. Let me show you the news, or what the Indian Central Bank put out today in a tweet. They said, "Rumors are being circulated in sections of social media about operations of banks to create panic among the public. All are advised not to fall prey to such baseless and false rumors." Okay, and they weren't just done. They put out another tweet a few hours later, and they said reports in some sections of social media about Reserve Bank of India closing down certain commercial banks are false. So they had to officially deny that there is an issue. First, they were general about saying there's these rumors, and then they specifically had to identify what those rumors were, was that the Reserve Bank of India was closing down certain commercial banks, and they had to say that was false. Now, banks do from time to time close down commercial banks. The United States, under the FDIC, or the other one that does the savings and loans, they often would close down failing banks or banks that were undercapitalized and then merge them with the stronger banks. It is a typical solution, especially when there's security deposit insurance involved and they don't want to have to pay out. They just merge banks. They shut one bank down or they merge it into another one. Now, Reserve Bank of India, for them to go onto social media and actually tweet this is a pretty big deal. But that's not what I want to talk about today, because this is all just rumor and speculation. There's something bigger going on with India. First, we're going to talk about the gold market, but then we're going to talk about the BRICS, the famous United States dollar-killing BRICS. The BRICS have had it. You've heard that story. BRICS is an acronym standing for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Well, let's look at the Indian gold market. We like to talk about the Indian gold market because they basically have to import all the gold that they need because they don't have any domestic mining production. Tomorrow, maybe tonight, we're going to talk about Russian gold demand for the central bank, which is met entirely by its domestic gold mining production, which is the second or third largest in the world in any given year. India, on the other hand, has to take its gold from the rest of the world. And of course, if China, which is the number one gold producing nation, doesn't export any gold, well, they're not getting it from them. Russia is now starting in 2019 to send some gold to India, but very little, because 85% of Russian mined gold ends up in India. I mean, in their central bank, not in India. And for the last few years, they've also been sending some to China. So there's really not much gold that India is going to get from Russia, none from China, maybe a little from India. So they have to rely on the rest of the world, the rest of the mining production of the world, to get additional gold that they might need. Now, other than the 18 to 22,000 tons of gold that are already in the country, that gold has to be available in the secondary market if people are willing to give it up. And in many instances, they're not. They're holding it, they're storing it. So demand is met mostly through new gold importation into India. Now, we did mention, however, that Indians, we've mentioned many times in the show that Indians are not FOMO buyers. They will not chase the price of gold higher. They're buying every year. Generally, they like to buy towards the end of the year after the rainy season. The crops have been brought in. They have a little extra cash. They're going to buy gold. But they're not going to go overboard if the price is high. They've seen this. It comes and it goes. They're not short-term players. If the price is high, they'll hold off. They'll wait till next year, or they'll wait for a few months. They're not going to buy at the price. I like to say they do not have FOMO. They have fear of overprice. They're not worried about fear of missing out. They're fear of overpricing, and they do not want to be buying when the price is high. And the World Gold Council is saying Indian gold imports were just 28 tons in August. That's 70% lower year over year, and 25% lower month over month, which means that July was a poor month and August was even worse. And of course, the World Gold Council is going to go into all I haven't read the report, but probably mentioning the same things that I'm mentioning, is that they buy when the price is low. But here's a more interesting story from Refinitiv. This is pointing out the mechanics of the Indian gold market. And I'm also going to tie this into the COMEX and how American bullion dealers, large bullion dealers, also work their gold stock. So, Refinitiv Metal says, though gold in India is at a deep discount. Okay, so the price of gold, they're ignoring the price, the COMEX price, whatever you want to call it, the global price. And in India, they will sell gold at a price lower. Why? Because the Indian consumer is saying, sorry, I'm not going to buy it at $1,525 an ounce. And so jewelers are saying, and bullion dealers are saying, okay, hold on. How about $1,490? How about $1,485? Now, they're not selling it at a loss. And you say, well, wait a minute. If the price is $1,525, how are Indian bullion dealers selling it for, say, $1,480 or $1,490? They got to be taking a loss. Well, this tweet says they're not buying any imported metal, which, of course, if they were to buy today, they would be paying the $1,525. But what they're doing is they're selling their existing inventory that they bought earlier in the year, which they didn't pay $1,525 for. It says banks have stopped their business totally. I wonder why the government doesn't allow banks to buy from local markets, because they can get the gold at a lower price. Now, that all sounds well and good for a dealer who bought gold early. The price has risen, and the consumers don't want to pay the price, so they say, hey, all right, I'll give you a discount on the price. And they're able to do it and still make a profit because they're holding on to stocks that maybe they bought at $13.85, $14.25, $14.50 an ounce, or the equivalent in rupee. So it's okay for them to do that. Well, that's not okay to do if the price is going in the other direction. Let's say they bought at $15.25 and the price goes down to $1,300. There's nothing they can do there to make a profit. They're stuck. So then at that point, what they do is they just don't sell the gold, and then because they don't sell it, then the price maybe starts to go up a little bit, but they really can't control the market that much internally by just holding back stocks, because someone will bring the new gold on the market, imported at $13.25, and sell it $13.50. So the dealers are really kind of hosed if the price goes in the other direction. Now, this is a problem for bullion dealers, small bullion dealers, like your local coin shop buys. They don't hedge anything. They buy the silver or the gold, and if it goes up, then maybe they can sell it and make a profit. If it goes down, they're stuck holding on to it, and they probably have to get rid of it. But what the larger, a lot of people don't know this, but the larger bullion dealers do, they don't care where the price goes because they hedge their gold. So a lot of people always complain about the COMEX is evil and it's screwing up the price. Well, you can blame some of your bullion dealers for this, because what they do if they, let's say, purchase from an authorized purchaser from the U.S. Mint, let's say they buy $1 million worth of Silver Eagles, monster boxes all stacked up. When they execute that order for the $1 million and they pay their authorized purchaser for those Silver Eagles and take delivery, well, you'd say, well, now they're hosed, because if the price of silver goes down 20%, they're not going to be able to change the price. They're going to have to honor the current market price. If you've ever gone online and tried to buy silver, the price changes every minute, and they honor the market price. So if the price goes down 20%, they're screwed. But if the price goes up 20%, you say, well, they win. And that's how they conduct their business for a profit or loss. No, that's not how they do it, because especially the last 7 years, they all would have gone out of business, because every time they bought silver, held it for a month or two, it would go down. So they'd be losing every time they sell it, and they wouldn't make it up on volume. They'd make it up on volume, losing even more. So what they do is, when they spend $1 million to buy the silver on that particular day, they also buy a short contract in the same amount. So if the price goes down, then they're covered. If the price goes up, they're covered. So either way, it doesn't matter to them where the price goes. All they have to do is make their 80 cents or dollar per coin that they sell. So they're not going to get any profit on the upside, and they're not going to lose any money on the downside. So they short the amount that they buy, and this way, no matter what happens, they're pretty much a wash. So they're not going to get any profit on an increase, and they're not going to lose any money on a decrease, because they're covered their bets by buying the short position. So that's why precious metals dealers, large ones, can honor the current price, and they can actually make money when the price goes down. They don't worry about it. They're covered, and they're not going to make any money if the price goes up. Actually, in some instances, the bullion dealer might want the price of the silver to go down, because it might spur more sales, because they're going to make the unit cost. They're not going to make a profit or loss on the metal. They're going to make their profit on the fact that they're going to sell each coin and make 80 cents a coin or a dollar coin, whatever the profit margin is. So that's a bit different for your local coin shop, who really can't hedge. They're not big enough to buy contracts in those amounts. And it's the same thing going on in India. But right now, the Indian gold dealers are not so much worried, because there's enough metal. They either have it or it's in the market already. And even though the price is not the market price, which we would call the market price, it's in clearing. The consumers aren't paying it. They have to discount it. They're still able to sell and maybe make a profit. But it does highlight that the Indian gold market is seizing up. But again, that's not what I want to talk about today either. I just figure we're on the topic. But I want to talk about the BRICS. And this is the constant gold pumper narrative. The BRICS have had it. China to crush the dollar. Game over. Game changer. Petro yuan. Gold back yuan. Russia and China. They're working together. India, the BRICS, Brazil, and so on. Well, something should be very apparent, and this is pretty much the update. Let's start with India. India is the I in the BRICS. Well, the United States and India have moved closer and closer together, and this is largely on the strength of Donald Trump's relationship with President Modi. President Modi was treated like a conquering hero in Houston, where he met with Donald Trump. There they are holding a picture of a rally they held at 50,000 people. They say good portion of those were Indian Americans, but the two of them seem to be, or at least externally, enamored with each other. They're holding hands, and then they're holding their hands aloft there in India. They're talking about trade deals. There's none of this animosity that you hear with China. He doesn't talk about India ripping us off and all this hyperbole and how she's a friend of mine, but so it looks like a wedge is being drawn between the United States, between India and China. Not that India needs reasons to be pushed away from China, because China and India are having territorial disputes up in the north there. There's some minerals that are in dispute, and large mineral deposits. And then, of course, India has issues with Pakistan, and China's got investments in Pakistan, and the United States is working with India. So I would say this concept of the BRICS working together, because they've had it with dollar hegemony, I would say I would not count on India working against the United States. Now, here's another example here with Trump. And here's what Modi says. You don't hear President Xi of China talking like this. President Trump on PM Modi's popularity. He's an American version of Elvis Presley. He says, I got great respect, a great admiration. I really like him. He's a great gentleman, a great leader. Howdy Modi showed how much I like India and your prime minister. He's like an American version of Elvis Presley. And Modi also reciprocated. Now, let's move on now to Brazil. Brazil is the big B in the BRICS. Well, Brazil was supposedly had it, and they were going to be working with China to end dollar hegemony and to crush the dollar, and they were going to create their own internal, whatever the gold pumper story was. Well, Bolsonaro has changed all that. Bolsonaro is very similar to Donald Trump in that he is a nationalist. He's considered right-wing, probably considered more right-wing than Donald Trump. And he is against things like climate change legislation. He's teamed up with Donald Trump on that at the UN. And China has warned Bolsonaro, calling him Tropical Trump. Will pay if Brazil breaks from its biggest partner, meaning China. Well, Russia, the United States, and Brazil are working on trade deals. And I know that Trump has helped also. Let me see, I think I have the article here. Has helped out in supporting Bolsonaro and his claims about the rest of the world, giving him a lot of grief over the climate change issues resulting from the deforestation of the Amazon rainforest. So the two of them appear to be, of all leaders in the world, two peas in a pod. So it's not like China has won over Brazil and they're working to crush the dollar either. Then there's also Russia. Now, if you listen to the mainstream media, they'll tell you that obviously Russia and the United States are big buddies if Trump is in office because Russia and the United States colluded to win the election for Trump. Well, putting that aside, though, Trump does seem to have an understanding with the Russians and with Putin that they shouldn't be our mortal enemies. He appears to be focused on China. What he's doing, it appears to me, is he has destroyed this BRICS narrative and has brought together India, has brought together Brazil into his orbit. And while he's been probably reluctant to do much directly with Russia, interesting the other day through all this Ukraine whistleblower controversy, he had the president of Zelensky on the spot in a press conference where looked like he was getting Zelensky to say, look, there was no pressure. I didn't have any pressure to investigate Biden. We're doing that on our own. But Trump kind of throws out gratuitously, I hope you and President Putin can get together and solve your problem. Now, he's telling this to a guy who lost Crimea to Putin. So I would imagine that the Ukrainian, I heard if you say the Ukraine, that's like some type of insult. I grew up, that's what I always heard it was called, the Ukraine. But if you are a Ukrainian national, the word is, you call it Ukraine. You don't call it the Ukraine. Anyway, apologize to people who take offense to that. But he just threw out you should work with, he didn't say my pal Vlad, but he basically said, you guys, I hope you can get together and solve your problem. Point being is that Trump is using every opportunity to make it look like he's got some type of influence in Russia, in India, and in Brazil. And he's even using it with supposed ally, the Ukrainian president. You can say that. You don't have to say Ukrainian president because you could say the United States president, even though it is the United States. Anyway, now what about South Africa? Well, what about South Africa? If anyone believes that South Africa today has any geopolitical significance, that it can work with another country, and that South Africa being in alliance with another country would somehow be in a position to, quote, crush the dollar, then you're not paying attention. Now, there was a time when South Africa did have some very significant geopolitical significance, geopolitical significance when it was the world's #1 gold producer and the world was on a gold standard, the Bretton Woods International Agreements of 1944. Well, then it was important. It was very strategic to have South Africa. That's why they allowed the apartheid to go on for so long, because they didn't want to. It's just like Saudi Arabia, why they look the other way, because it's got the geopolitical significance, because it's got oil. Other countries, they would be less likely to put up with these types of abuses. But today, South Africa doesn't have apartheid anymore, but it also doesn't have any oil, any real significant gold production. I think it's not even #1 in Africa anymore. Ghana has that distinction, and so therefore, South Africa is not as significant geopolitically as it once was. So it looks like Trump has managed to pretty much disrupt the BRICS, which I think all along was just a Goldman Sachs an acronym. I don't think that it really was any real serious threat where they sat around and talked about gold and crushing the dollar and ending dollar hegemony and multipolar world and all this other stuff. Well, there it is. Let's see what you guys are saying about India and the BRICS. Whether you think the BRICS have had it and whether they're still a threat to the United States. Let's see what we have. All right. I got Joshua is here. We got a big crowd for it. This is a matinee. We'll be back tonight, so don't worry. Let's see what we have. Max Strong is here. He says he trusts all central banks, especially the Indian central bank, right? They got that fancy name, Reserve Bank of India. Joshua, RBI would never go out of the way, undermine U.S.-Indian relations and attempt to undercut Maganomics. Never ever with ice cream sprinkles on top. This is days after Modi visits. I mean, it's so obvious, says Joshua. Yet no one will characterize it as a politically motivated psyop. That's true. Albert S. invested in HDFC, the best bank in India. Okay. Tax on gold has increased to a new high in India. Yeah, I think it's like 12.5%. It is crazy. You got the tax, then you got the goods and services tax on top of that in India. And then you got the high price. So it's no surprise. See, when Westerners try to say that they have this mentality that the East is smart, they buy gold, Sun Tzu, all this nonsense, that people in China and India just wake up and they have this like deranged thought that they have to get gold. I mean, they've created this concept that, I don't know, that their appetite for gold is so voracious. They don't care what the price is. They just have to have gold. They're buying gold hand over fist. That's what you hear on all these channels. No, they're just like everybody else. They're no smarter. They're no dumber. They get gold. They understand gold. Americans are stupid. No, they're stupid Indians and they're stupid Chinese. And there's Indians and Chinese that aren't obsessed with gold. And there are Indians and Chinese that are smart gold buyers. And I would say, though, in general, I don't know much about the Chinese gold buying, but it's clear the Indian gold buying is much more sane, much more market-driven, much more imbued in the, they know their market. If you're always buying, if you buy gold over a lifetime, not once, but as part and parcel of your culture, you know you need to have a certain amount. You know you're going to have a certain amount for gifts. You know you're going to have a certain amount for your daughters. They know when to buy it, so they're not going to be chasing the price higher. The Chinese may not have that same concept, being that they haven't been in a free market economy for so long. They've only been recently allowed and encouraged to buy gold. But this idea that somehow Indians and Chinese are smart because they like gold and Westerners are dumb, that's just another gold pumper meme. You're building up China and India in that respect. Because China and India, at their core, are not gold nations. That's not what Modi is about. That's not what the foreign policy is about. Gold is not front and foremost in either of these nations' mind, despite what you hear when they talk breathlessly about how much gold might be in each country. All right, what else do we have in questions? All right, so Joshua has a comment here that has been hidden because he used the S word, but I will read it to you. The trumpeting is proceeding at pace of expectation as people all over the world go back to basics and elect populists who actually gives a beep about their peoples. That's not a rhetorical question. He's saying they're electing populists who actually give about their peoples. And this actually is a general, I would say, I don't want to use a cliche, mega trend. But if you study history starting in the early 19th century, actually start with Napoleon and then move on from there, you start to see the nation states really rise in Europe instead of having these small city-states. So, for example, when Beethoven wrote the Eroica Symphony, I think it was number 3, he was writing about praising Napoleon. He crowned himself emperor for the glory of France. But Beethoven was born in the country, basically, of Bonn. He wasn't born in Germany. It's Germany now. Germany and Switzerland and Italy were all city-states, made up of many, many different city-states. And Italy, through Garibaldi, Germany, through Otto von Bismarck, you had those countries come into being. The modern-day Germany, modern-day Italy, 1859, 1870. So this was the rounding up of the rolling up of small city-states into these larger mega entities. Then, we had the European Union in the 20th century, joining together all the European nations. And now we're starting to see that break apart. You started to see in Spain, Catalonia, Galicia, the Basques all wanting to break away. You see in Italy, Lega Nord. You see the people wanting to split Italy back into different component parts. So that is, you see Brexit wanting to get out of the European Union. So that is something that's happening across the world, and it's just the natural ebb and flow. And also in the United States, if you think about the Civil War, that was the same thing. The concept of union, the concept of bringing together the whole country. I mean, because today, maybe you might have a situation where the South would just leave and the president say, go ahead, do what you got to do. It's just natural that we have different cultures. Back then, the culture between the North and the South was immense. Not so much today, because the country has become, in a sense, more unified, although that's breaking apart again, too. But back then, you had northern industrialists, and then you had southern plantations. And so the idea that they had to be brought together was a very, very 19th century concept. And I think now we're moving away from the idea of rolling into larger entities. We're now in this more self-determination or sovereign areas wanting to run their own affairs. And you're seeing that now with we talked about this last night, with the marijuana laws, with the states saying, hey, we want to have our own marijuana laws. We don't want the federal marijuana law. We're seeing it with states saying, hey, we want to have illegal immigrants, illegal aliens. We want to have migrants. We want to give them rights and welfare, and we want to be a sanctuary state, sanctuary city, even though the federal government says no. They say we want to control our borders. So you are definitely, that's a good point, Josh. We are definitely seeing this rise of the nationalist or the localist even. All right, David Cox. South Africa was not in the original BRIC nations as defined by Goldman Sachs. Well, there you go, BRIC. Okay. Encryptindie broker, what's going on in India? I don't know. I mean, they're responding to. They are responding to social media rumors, which they probably shouldn't, but they are responding to them. There's probably something to it. There's probably some banking stress in India. It may not be to the extent of a crisis, but see, the problem in the United States is, and I sent out to the Smaulgld patrons and Subscribe Star an article explaining that this is I don't deny it. It is a financial system stress that the Fed has to do this repo, but it's not an economic stress. So some people are trying to make this out to be that there's something wrong with the economy. No, there's something wrong with you have all this financial intervention and QE, and they're trying to manipulate interest rates, and there's not enough liquidity in the repo market, so the Fed has to jump in. That's got nothing to, well, might have something, but it's largely a financial system issue. It's not necessarily an economic issue. Probably not at all. All right. In crypto, 3 broker does not like Modi, and that particular comment was also hidden, but I could see that one. He's got an S word ending with an M. Okay. Josh, a type plan to create a global module to offset the U.S. and undermine the West. Well, that is the key, yes, that the United States should not be the only superpower. That's the whole multipolar world. It's interesting how the gold bugs, who generally tend to be libertarian, tend to be conservative, support the whole multipolar world, anti-U.S. hegemony type of argument. I guess they got that from Ron Paul. End the dollar hegemony. You hear him always saying that, and people are like, yeah, you go, Ron, be against the United States and support Chinese hegemony and Chinese money printing and Chinese debt. There's this myth that somehow that China's productive, the United States isn't, China is smart, and Sun Tzu. All right. Albert S. says, I'm Chinese and I like Indians. Hey, there's no reason not to like Chinese. There's no reason not to like anyone but nice to hear that comment. Joshua, Dr. Guvar Kumar, good point. Yeah, Lucy touched on that. Where's Dr. Kumar? Oh, here we are. Hey, I'm Indian. We have so many problems with China. No Indian worth the salt likes China. Oh, I see why Albert said I'm Chinese and like Indians. I think what happens in all these cases is, on individual basis, look, in the World War I, that famous story about how the Germans and the French on, it was either New Year's Eve or Christmas, I think it was Christmas Eve, they got out of their trenches, and to the horror of their commanders, they went out and shook hands and then played a friendly soccer game, and then in the morning they got up and they started shooting at each other. I think it's more like the governments of the countries dislike each other more than and they have to teach you not to like them. But I do think that there is a legitimate beef that India and Chinese have about their borders. And that's always the case. Countries, if there's anything valuable on the border, then they're going to be against each other. But the idea that Westerners are saying that India and China is going to team up and crush the dollar, not quite sure that they have that interest there. All right. Working Rageaholic Smaulgld. I know you're having trouble with YouTube, but don't let it stop you live streaming. I try not to, but I do have trouble where I appreciate the support, but it doesn't help me with YouTube when they don't let me on or I get cut off. So I came out of 3. They're not cutting me off today so far. Happy Thursday. Stack mugs. Yes, mugs are real wealth. You see them on your screen right there. Part of memes. Okay. Let's see what else we have. All right. Joshua says, libertarians are useful idiots for globalism. Well, the interesting about libertarianism is a lot of it's theoretical, and they get dogmatic about tariffs. They get dogmatic about free trade. And even if you read Adam Smith, and I covered this, even Adam Smith said, I got my book right here. It's a little dark here. We got a little storm coming with my light on. I don't have the exact page. But there's a page in here about, even Adam Smith says that sometimes tariffs need to be imposed in order to kind of create more free trade if there's already tariffs. Now, he's not in favor of tariffs in general. I mean, the general concept is, why should you make something in your country or in your state or in your region when someone else, some other state, region, or country can make it for less? And you can therefore focus on producing something else that you do best. It's the idea of the global division of labor. There's nothing, I mean, it makes total sense, but that's theory. That's not how it works. Then countries do try to gain an advantage. Then they believe this dogma, no one wins in a trade war. Well, okay, but that means, so if someone's fighting a war against you, say, well, I'm not going to fight a war because I'm not going to win. No, you fight back, and the way they fight back is by putting other tariffs in there. That's something I think that libertarians they don't see that. They just think, no, tariffs are bad, okay? And then they insist that tariffs are not good, and anyone who advocates for tariffs is an economic ignoramus. That's not necessarily true. If you advocate, now remember, tariffs, if you're a constitutionalist, were what paid for the U.S. government. there was no income tax until 1913. That's how you funded the federal government. And that's also how we had a limited government, because there's only so much you can tax on tariffs. But that's another argument in favor of tariffs or limited tariffs. All right, I mean to get off on that tangent. What else do we have? Someone has to rule the world. NT America, says ARW. I don't know what that means. NT. Oh, why not America? Well, if there was a way, that's the idea of the United Nations, that all nations can get along and agree to settle their differences. But actually, if you think about what nationalism is, it's almost a free market. It basically says every country is out for themselves. There's nothing, that's basically how a market works. But in every country pursuing its own self-interest, economic self-interest, by definition, that involves having to trade with other countries, so you build up your own country. And the more competitive countries win. It's the same with the competition for labor would be the same way. Now, if the competition is not for labor, but you want to bring people into your country so they can vote for you, irrespective of whether they're going to contribute. Now, refugees, that's not an economic argument. Refugees is a human, what's the word? I guess it's a form of charity. It's a form of national assistance. So if you want to open your borders to refugees because of humanitarian, that's the word, humanitarian crisis, that's one thing. But if your policy is just to import people because they're poor, that doesn't really help, because all they're going to do is help impoverish the country that they come to, unless they're going there. See, the open borders crowd is correct if you're talking about a free market amongst nations. Well, the countries that are doing the best will attract the most migrants. They'll travel thousands of miles, as they did in the 1880s, 1890s, 1900s. People from Scotland, England, Germany, Eastern Europe, Italy, they came from all over France to Ireland to work basically for low wages, but wages that were higher than they were going to get in their own country. And that was a market that drove people to the United States. But if the idea is they're going to come and just vote for you, and then while they're there, they're going to get assistance, that's not really a free market. That's politics. That's not economics. And it's actually negative economics. All right. Moved off topic there again. Let's see. If you go cashless, the currency in circulation collapses, says Albert S. Now, Josh says, I would prefer to see an assortment of constitutional republics dominate the planet. Well, in that sense, each constitutional republic would defend its own sovereignty, its own borders, but it wouldn't mean that they would be closed off to the world. It would mean that if it was in their interest to have relations with other, what you call constitutional republics, they would. And they would form something of a confederacy amongst nations. I mean, that's what the first League of Nations was, and they thought it didn't have enough teeth. Probably wasn't supposed to. Now, the United Nations really doesn't have enough teeth either, because you got a Security Council, but it's run by the United States. It's the same with the IMF. The IMF is run by the United States. People talk about they're going to make the SDR. No, they're not. The United States has veto power over almost anything the IMF wants to do, and they're not just going to allow the SDR to be introduced to crush the dollar and end dollar hegemony. It's not going to happen that way. All right, let's see. Joshua says we pull out of the UN. Well, it's interesting because the UN really should be, it's hard to say what it should be. What it is not a binding, I mean, if a country wants to, if the United States wants to defy the UN, it can defy the UN. Who's going to stop it? So it's almost like, what's the point? I think the point of it is to have a forum, but it's not going to be world government, because the world government can only be made up of strong nations, and the strongest nation is going to decide what that government is. So no government is going to give up its sovereignty to the point where they say, yeah, okay, so Laos and Cuba and three other countries they're gonna be able to tell us what to do when there's no way that they can tell them what to do other than you let them tell you what to do. And that, as they say in Shrek, that's never going to happen. All right. Anything else you guys got for me today? Otherwise, we will see you tonight. And let's see. Arian Gorman says, IE. All right. Josh, most if not all our puppet POTUSs comply with UN dictates whenever it hurts the U.S. Well, but that's not natural, you would say. That's only if somehow you're trying to relink. If you look at any organization, any country, any corporation, the general trend towards any entity, organic entity, is to grow and to become stronger, not to divulge of your power. Generally, it's always a good thing to hold on to your power and then to use it maybe sparingly. But it's not a good thing just to give up your power. It just doesn't make any sense. All right. We will see you guys later tonight.